I'm Tabia from the Confucius Institute in Manchester. Welcome everybody to our online talk on China's popular winter foods on this dark, wintry, cold day. We are joined by Sam Sin from Choy's Kitchen, who we've been working with for quite a while on face-to-face cooking classes and also some tutorials since we can't meet up on campus since March. The Confucius Institute has really focused on well-being practices and sharing Chinese practices through online content and online tutorials. So the cooking was very much part of that. When we are also facing spending Christmas at home, we thought this is a good time to share maybe new recipes. Thought it would be brilliant for Sam to actually come in and share dessert, because we haven't shared the dessert before. I hope you enjoy the talk. I will ask you to put any questions you have in the chat, and we'll have time at the end to ask them. That's enough from me. I'm just going to stop sharing my screen and hand over to Sam Sin from Choy's Kitchen. Enjoy the talk.
Thanks, Tabia. Okay, hi everyone. I created my presentation on Canva, which means that my video actually disappears when I share my screen. So sorry that I'm just a voice and a presentation, but I will appear back to you again soon after we have finished the presentation. So welcome to Choy's talk today. Thank you very much for joining us. I know it's a busy time of year for everybody as everyone is winding down for Christmas and trying to get everything ready in the unusual times that we find ourselves in. So thank you very much for taking the time to come and join us. So as Tabia was saying, I have been working with the Confucius Institute to teach some traditional Chinese cooking and recipes from kind of my experience of Chinese cookery, but also things that I've learned through the work that I do and through friends and family. Some of you may have attended my cookery classes before, either with the Confucius Institute or in other guises with other organisations that I work with. So feel free to just pop onto the chat box if you want to ask any questions about previous classes that you've attended, or have some ideas of some future classes that you might want us to look at. So today we are looking at Christmas in China and any popular winter foods that may be eaten in those times. So I've just got a poll that's just popped up on my screen. I'm just going to click that off, sorry. Okay, so just to give you kind of a bit of information about me and my background. So I am what is known as British-born Chinese. So my parents are from Hong Kong and they emigrated in their late teens to the UK from Hong Kong separately. They met and got married here. And they basically, like a lot of migrants from China at that time, went into the catering industry. So we, oh, sorry, all these polls keep popping up on my screen. So we basically had Chinese takeaways and restaurants growing up, and I grew up working in that industry and kind of learnt the trade from there. I have kind of had a fairly long career working within the voluntary sector, mainly working with migrants and refugees who have come from other countries. And I feel like that's really influenced my way of cooking and the foods that I enjoy as well. So after a bit of a career break, I decided to kind of concentrate on life in the catering sector again, because one of my life passions is sharing food and eating food and kind of exploring how culture and food work together. So that's where kind of Choy came about. And a lot of the work that I did in the past was about training people in other ways of working, and it kind of worked quite well that I had that kind of training background, and I'm particularly interested in cooking and have some recipes to share. So that's how I've ended up working as a cookery teacher. Choy, we have done various recipes, and as Tabia was saying, we have cooked various savoury foods with Confucius Institute. That's mostly been in the face-to-face classes. It's been kind of a variety of celebratory foods according to the time of the year. So, for example, we did dumpling making for Chinese New Year. There was actually a sweet dumpling recipe that we shared in that class. We've done a class specifically on vegetarian Chinese food, because vegetarian food is particularly popular these days, and more people are reducing the amount of meat that they eat. Vegetarian food is very widely available within Chinese cuisine because of the Buddhist religion that is widely practiced in China. So, you know, we have had a variety of meals that we've shared. This recipe that I'm going to share with you today is based on apples, and you will find out why soon enough. But over the next half an hour or so, I'm going to talk to you generally about Chinese Christmas time, the popular things that happen, and popular foods that people eat at this time of year. And then also I'm going to share that recipe with you. I did a quick video of when I made the recipe a couple of weeks ago to share with you, and I'll share that video as well. So there is time for questions and answers at the end. So if you want to pop any questions in the chat box, as Tabia was saying earlier, that's much appreciated. So happy Christmas in Chinese. So my background is I'm from Hong Kong. I speak Cantonese. So if I was to wish you a happy Christmas, I would say Sing Dan Fai Lot, which basically translates to Christmas happy. So if you were to literally translate it, it is Christmas happy. And in Mandarin, a slightly different pronunciation, and because I don't speak Mandarin, I may completely get this wrong, but the way that I would pronounce it is Shengdan Kuai Lo. So it's a useful phrase to know in China if you ever spend Christmas time there. And also, if you are one of the students at the Manchester Confucius Institute, you may already know how to say this and have been learning it in your classes recently, and I may have completely butchered the language, so apologies for that. But with my family, we would say it in Cantonese, and it's Sing Dan Fai Lo. Okay, so Christmas celebrations in China. So in China, it's difficult to actually find the correct statistics, so they're wide-ranging, but around about 3% of people in China are Christian and would celebrate Christmas for the religious purposes. The official government statistics is around 1%, but then I've also seen other statistics that show you that it's between 3 and 5%. So I'm going to stick around 3% of people, but it is a growing religion. So as Christmas is pretty much a non-religious celebration in the majority of the major cities in China, it is very much commercial, and as you would see in the city centres and the shopping malls or shopping centres in the Western world, where Christmas is more widely celebrated, there is lots of kind of dazzle and glitter and Christmas trees and Santa's grottos and that kind of thing. So you'll also find the same in major cities around China and Southeast Asia in general. So you'll find Christmas trees and lights and decorations all over the streets. There'll be Santa's grottos in shops, and even postmen would actually dress up as Santa around Christmas time as they're delivering their letters. So it's very much a fun time of year, very festive. If you're in the smaller towns and the village areas, you may not see any sign of Christmas at all. So it is very much something that is celebrated in the bigger cities. So the Christmas traditions, so at Christmas Eve, people who are celebrating Christmas for religious purposes, they would attend the usual midnight mass. But you might find that the carols that are sung might be different. So a lot of the traditional Christmas carols that we have in the UK, for example, people may not know the actual words because they might not be translated into Chinese. So there would be kind of the major ones that, such as, so there'd be the major ones that people would sing, but I think a common one would be just singing kind of general Christmas songs like Jingle Bells, which kind of is quite repetitive and people would generally get the gist of without having to be able to read and write English as such. So there would be other performances. So there would be more kind of cultural dancing and drama performances. So in the way that we have Christmas nativity, I guess it would be the equivalent of that. In the area that you are celebrating Christmas, you would have your traditional drama performances and cultural dances, just as a general way for the community to be able to celebrate the festive season together. So this is a phenomenon that I wasn't really aware of because it's actually quite a new way to celebrate Christmas in China. It's only really been popularized in the last 10 years, in the last decade, whereby people will gift each other apples on Christmas Eve. They can be just an apple that is, not decorated, or because it's very much a commercial affair now, people are actually decorating their apples. So people might just use some paint and just paint a nice picture on it, or carve a picture into the apple, or maybe put them in a nice presentation box with lots of kind of cellophane and ribbon wrapping it all around. And the idea behind the decorated apples is to give them out on Christmas Eve. And the reason why that is done is because if you know a little bit about Chinese culture, you'll know that we're quite superstitious people or auspicious people, and we like words that reminiscent of things that bring fortune or luck. So, for example, when we want to wish somebody prosperity, we may give them oranges or tangerines. That happens quite a lot during Chinese New Year, for example. So the golden colour of a tangerine or an orange is similar to the golden colour of gold coins or gold ingots, as they were called in the past, when ingots were around before coins and paper notes. So by gifting somebody a tangerine or an orange, you're wishing them prosperity in the future. So with that example, that directly translates to the apple, which is given now during Christmas Eve, where the I'm going to use the Cantonese word for apple is pingguo. So pingguo means peace fruit, and the Cantonese word for Christmas Eve basically sounds very similar. And because there's a very similar sound, then this apple is now being used as a way to wish people a happy Christmas or a happy Christmas Eve by passing on the apple as a gift. It's a well wish for that season and that festive time. So as Christmas is very much a commercial venture in China, then this idea of gifting fancy looking apples has really blossomed, and it's something that especially the younger generation taking part in and giving to each other. So children for example, might offer an apple to their teacher at Christmas rather than the usual box of chocolates or a bottle of wine that might be offered in this country. Okay, so, oh, sorry, I've clicked out of the presentation. Bear with me 1 minute. Sorry. Okay. So on Christmas Day, so because Christmas Day isn't actually, well, Christmas isn't a national holiday. Christmas Day then isn't a public holiday for most people. They're still working, or if it's a weekday, children will be at school. So people, it's generally not a day that people would kind of take time off for. So if people are working or studying, then they would have their Christmas celebrations in the evening and save themselves for that. It's not common that people would actually take the day off specifically to celebrate Christmas. Also because the statutory holiday allowance in China isn't as generous as it is in the UK. So people, unless they are really into celebrating Christmas, may not want to take their holidays for that time. It's mostly saved for Chinese New Year, which is a much more popularly celebrated time of year. So as people are usually celebrating in the evening, it's usually the younger people who would celebrate by exchanging gifts with their partners or with their friends. They'll enjoy a meal together, maybe go out for dinner. And a popular pastime in China is singing karaoke. So people would frequent karaoke bars, or they would have a karaoke party at home. And maybe sing Christmas songs together, but generally just getting together and having a nice time. And just as Christmas is for a lot of people, it's about a gathering of people, sharing a nice meal, and spending that time together. Okay, so talking about food now, which is why we're here. So generally, food, the Christmas Day dinner or Christmas food in China isn't really the same as how we would have it in the UK. It's not a big Christmas roast dinner with a turkey in the middle of the table. It's very much seasonal food that's available locally at that time. So when I was looking at how to present this, it kind of became apparent that it was more appropriate to talk about winter food and the kind of the thought process behind how food and medicine actually come hand in hand. So as Tabia was saying before, we're looking at kind of health and well-being at the moment, and within Chinese culture, health and well-being and food are very much intertwined. So if you know a little bit about Chinese culture, you might know about Yin and Yang, which runs throughout everything. It's not just about food. It's about kind of having a balance in life, no matter what it is. So when it comes to having balance in Chinese food, the idea of Yin and Yang foods, so there's kind of a way of separating the food so that it's known as Yin food or Yang food. And generally speaking, Yin food is commonly referred to as cold food, and not because it's kind of the temperature is cold. It's not food that's come straight out of the fridge. It's actually food that is cooling, has a cooling effect to the body. And Yang foods would be the opposite. So they're known as hot foods or heaty foods, which bring heat or warmth to the body. So when it comes to having a meal, generally, if you were sharing a meal as a family, you would have a good mixture of Yin foods and Yang foods. So I'm going to talk a little bit more about what that encompasses, but you would generally have a few dishes on the table for everybody to share together, and that would be a mixture of meats and vegetables usually. and having a balance and being able to choose what you want from that shared meal in the middle of the table means that you can almost kind of tailor the meal to the diet that best suits your body. So a person can either be a yin person or a yang person. It's a bit difficult to explain without kind of going into it in too much detail. But generally speaking, a general indication would be if you generally have cold hands, then you would be a yin person. If you generally are quite warm and have hot hands, then you would be a yang person. So if, for example, I generally have quite cold hands, so I'm a yin person, which means that I should try and eat more foods which bring warmth into my body. And then the opposite is the same for somebody who generally has quite warm. They quite like to open windows when the heating is on, that kind of thing. Then they're better off eating more colder foods and help to bring the balance into the body. So yin foods, generally, you would need to consult a list really to see whether the food that you're eating is yin or yang. But generally speaking, yin foods can be on the bitter side and more salty, and generally they have a higher moisture content. So that would be things like cucumbers, tofu, because tofu is made from soybeans. In terms of meat, it would be pork. Lots of vegetables are yin foods, things that kind of have that high water content like lettuces and cabbages and that kind of thing. And then the yang foods would be things that are generally more sweet and spicy. And they are often grown inside the soil. So for example, it would be vegetables such as potatoes and yams, and it would be kind of garlic and onions and lots of other kind of spices that bring warmth and heat into the body. And then a typical yang meat would be lamb or beef. So when you look at having a balanced meal, even if you're just cooking for yourself or just a couple of people, rather than if you're having kind of a meal that's just plated up in front of you, rather than family style where you have everything in the middle and you help yourself, you would still look at trying to have a combination of yin and yang ingredients in your cooking. The other thing to also be aware of is, despite that ingredients can be hot or cold ingredients, the cooking method also affects whether the food can be yin or yang. So I'm going to use the example of rice. Rice is seen as quite a neutral food. It can be it's not either yin or yang really, it's just, we call it neutral. But the way that you cook it can change it. So for example, a really common food that you would find in Chinese restaurants and takeaways in the UK is egg fried rice or some kind of fried rice. So the fact that it is fried actually takes it into the heat section of the yin yang food list, because any food which is fried or grilled or stir fried automatically turns it into a meal which is much more kind of heating and warming to the body. Whereas food which is steamed or boiled or cooked at quite low temperatures, kind of for a very short time, they would be seen as yin foods. So when I have a meal with my family, we may have one dish which is just some very lightly stir-fried greens such as Pak Choy, and we would also have a steamed fish, so those would be your yin foods. And then when on the side of that there would always be a meat dish, so it might be a braised or a stewed beef with potatoes or with lotus root, something like that, or pumpkin at this time of year. It's quite common. That would kind of balance the meal, and you would kind of bring the heat and the warmth of the meal together with that. So that's kind of an example of how you can balance the yin and yang. When it comes to winter time, obviously it's very cold outside and people want to eat something which is warming. So they are more likely to go towards the yang food section of the kind of yin yang balance. So if during winter time people might use more beef and mutton and pumpkins and radishes, and that is something which kind of lends basically to the seasonal foods which are available at that time as well. So it kind of if you look at seasonality, basically it's the kind of foods that are kind of in season at that time, which are more readily available to people as well. So they are also more commonly eaten for that reason. In wintertime, soups are made much more frequently. So for my family, when we get together to have a meal, there will always be a soup, especially in wintertime, and we would finish off the meal with a bowl of soup, which is the opposite of the way that it's usually done in the West, where you might have soup as a starter. We would end the meal with a soup. And the reason we do that is because we tend to have a broth rather than a thick soup. And the ingredients that are used in a soup are ingredients which we would kind of associate with yin food. And that would mean that the soup is cooling to the body. And it's a nice way to end the meal if it's something that's been really heavy and rich in meat and fried ingredients, which are kind of bringing that heat. So hopefully that kind of, if you want any more explanation, I'm not sure if I'm explaining it in the correct way that makes it easy to understand. It's quite a complex idea to get your head around at first. But yeah, it's something that we almost do because we grow up with these ideas. We kind of do it subconsciously when we're choosing what to eat that day. But yeah, generally speaking, a family meal would also include a soup. Right, so in the picture on the right, you've got a picture of a hot pot. I don't know if anybody has heard of hot pot or even tried it or taken part in it, but it's actually a really great way to celebrate any kind of occasion. So when I have a celebratory meal with the family, we tend to have hot pot, and that's having a big steaming pot of broth in the middle of the table with raw ingredients around it, and people will cook their own ingredients. So as you can see, there's bits of meat and seafood and vegetables and mushrooms, which you use chopsticks, or there might be a little kind of basket that you use to put the ingredients in the table. In the middle of the soup pot, in the middle of the table, and people will help themselves. So you might be more familiar with a raclette, which is the French version where there's kind of cheese in the middle and you kind of dip ingredients into a pot of cheese, or a chocolate fondue would be a very similar a sweet version of this, people helping themselves. So it's quite a fun activity to do communally. This is something that we do quite often for Chinese New Year. So in the last Chinese New Year, I had all my extended family around, and we had a couple of these pots of soup in the middle of the table, and everybody just kind of hangs around and just comes and sits at the table, has a little bit to eat. They might sit around and chat to the people who were there at the time, and then when they've had their fill, or they want to have a break, then they'll wander off to another part of the house and go and chat to somebody else, and then come back and have a few nibbles later on. It's not a formal sit down meal. It is very casual, and you pick and choose what you want to eat. My family would generally have just quite a plain chicken or fish broth in the middle of the table. And as you can see in the picture, there you can actually have two separate broths. So the darker one at the top is a chili Sichuan style broth that is very spicy, and then you've got the milder one on the other side, so people can pick and choose which side that they want. So taking this back to Yin and Yang foods, a hot pot is very much a Yang food where you're cooking meats for quite extended periods of time. You would have dipping sauces, which generally include lots of chili and garlic and other spices. So it's quite a heaty meal. So the way that we counterbalance this is by using alcohol. So, you know, it's a social activity, it's a party, people drink beer, and beer is very much a cooling food, if you can call it food. So it's on the opposite side of the spectrum. So people would have a nice alcoholic beverage to go along with their meal, and that helps to bring balance into the body. For people who don't drink alcohol, then maybe tea. So green tea has a very cooling effect and is quite often drunk with a meal. That might be quite heating. Okay, so other dishes that you might typically find during winter. So things that I'm cooking quite a lot of at the moment is dumplings. So Chinese New Year usually happens in winter time. So you find that dumplings are traditional Chinese food during the New Year season, but also we have them because they can be boiled or fried, and they're quite nice as a nice kind of a snack that's kind of brings a lot of warmth to the body, and there's lots of nice kind of spicy dips that you can have with it. If you ever visit China, or if you've visited China before, then you might have seen that there's barbecues out on the streets that are a nice street food snack to go and try. Lots of different types of barbecue. It's very common throughout the year, but particularly popular during the winter months. And the things that people would cook at home would be more braised and stew dishes using more root vegetables. So the radish we would just generally use, I don't know if you've heard of mooli or Chinese radish, it's a long white one, and that holds really well but when you're kind of cooking for long periods of time. Mutton is quite widely enjoyed throughout China, but in the UK we might use something like a braising beef instead. So yeah, then also porridge, rice porridge. If you know what congee is, it's a very commonly eaten breakfast item, which often is served with deep fried dough sticks and maybe dumplings or fried noodles. So very good for filling the stomach during winter time. So those are the kind of wintry foods that you would expect in China at this time of year. With China being such a huge country, it is going to be vastly different according to which area you're from. So in the north, you're more likely to find things which are wheat-based, whereas in the south, you find things that are more rice-based. So noodles, for example, in the southern areas, they're more likely to be made from rice flour or rice, and the opposite in the northern areas where wheat-based noodles are much more popular. Okay, so on to our recipe of the apple fritters. Okay, so I'm going to explain the recipe, and as I said before, I did a video, and I've just kind of put a speeded up version of the video onto the next slide, just so that you can see what it would look like if we were doing the class in person. But this is a common street food that's found in China that is cooked to order. So the image that you've got on the left is an image that I've taken off the internet of how it would look if you were to eat it as a street food snack. So basically the apples are coated in caramel and they're served in a plate, on a communal plate with a glass of ice water. And the idea is that that caramel is actually still hot and soft and quite gloopy when it's served to the customer. But what you would do is use the chopsticks and pick up a piece, and then you would actually dunk it into ice cold water to actually set the caramel, and then you would have a crispy coating, and everybody would do that for their own piece. Obviously, it's something which can be a bit dangerous to have around young children, so it's quite nice to actually make the dish complete and serve it to people, as I have done on the right hand side. So you may have already eaten this before in a Chinese restaurant or takeaway. I remember growing up with this as a child. So as I said, my family have always had a restaurant or a takeaway of some sort on the go whilst I was growing up. And I think I started working in the shop from a really young age, when I was old enough to fold a menu, probably about 6 or 7. I was folding menus, and back in the day when you had to get sacks of potatoes and peel them and chop them, I was peeling potatoes or peeling prawns, you know, that kind of thing. Anything that somebody my age could do, I was doing. And then probably something that wouldn't be allowed these days, I was working behind the bar at the age of 10. So yeah, my parents used to tell people I was 16 because I was quite tall for my age. So yeah, I kind of did all sorts within the kitchen setting: pot washing, waitressing, cooking in the kitchen, everything. And I used to see these toffee apples going out to customers, and they would be customers who were kind of, you know, regular customers and were friends of the family, basically, because we had the same restaurant for about 25 years. And we had customers who basically saw me grow up from a very young age as a baby up until, you know, I know some of them now. And we didn't have this toffee apple on the menu because they're quite faffy to do. And when you're working in the industry and you need to try and turn tables quickly and get the food out quickly, it's quite difficult to be able to do this, make this dessert whilst you're kind of using the woks to cook something else. So if you were a friend of the family, or if it was a special occasion, for example, we would have like a Christmas banquet, and it would be a set meal, and this would be like the extra special desserts that you would get at Christmas time. So it kind of brings those memories to me and evokes those kind of ideas and feelings of Christmas and celebration. But also because this idea now that giving apples to people during Christmas time is a way to wish people peace and happiness in the festive season. It also kind of brings that nice feeling of warmth from kind of this new tradition that you find in China. So it's quite nice that people see apples as a nice Christmas treat as well. So these are the ingredients if you want to cook them yourself. This is a really basic recipe. I've actually skipped a couple of ingredients out of it just to make it easier for you to be able to source the ingredients, but also so that this is suitable for people who are avoiding any kind of animal products. So, for example, the recipe that I have from my parents involves using egg in the batter. I have just stuck with using water and flour in this, but if you do want to use an egg, then you would just reduce the amount of water and use an egg that you would whisk and add into the batter to give it a richer flavour. It also helps to colour the batter a little bit as well when you're deep frying it. And then some recipes you actually use a little bit of corn flour, so it would be a mixture of plain flour and corn flour, just to give you a lighter batter. But I really don't think that you actually need to have that mixture, because you're actually going to be coating everything in caramel, which makes it quite heavy anyway. So maybe if you are going to make this recipe and not have the caramel coating, it's quite common that you have it with, for example, just some golden syrup or honey drizzled over it, then it might be worthwhile using the corn flour and the plain flour mixture. So it would be about 30 to 40 grams of corn flour that you would take out of the allowance for the plain flour. So this recipe, I'd say is for between 2 and 4 people. It really depends on how many apple pieces you want. So if you want to account for 1 whole apple per person, because it's going to form their main dessert, then I would account for 1 apple each. So this is a recipe for 2 people. Whereas if it's going to be a snack that you can have at the table just for people, as they're kind of, you know, lots of other things around, like, you know, Christmas time, there's always chocolates and nuts and that kind of stuff around, then maybe use 2 apples for a group of people. So then you've also got the sesame seeds and white sugar and oil for deep frying. So I don't have a deep fat fryer at home. I just used oil in a frying pan, in a saucepan. So you may want to do that as well. Okay, so equipments wise, you need a large saucepan. You'll see why later, and a frying pan or a wok. I use some chopsticks. You need to make sure that if you are using chopsticks that they're wooden ones, anything that's not going to conduct heat, because I used it to take the apple pieces in and out of the boiling hot oil. If you don't want to use chopsticks, or you're not that adept at using them, then using a pair of tongs or a slotted spoon would also work. You need a mixing bowl and a whisk to make your batter, and then to chop up the apples you've got your chopping board, knife and peeler, and then you need a plate and some kitchen paper for draining the apples after you have fried them. So this is a speeded up version of how I actually made them. So it's basically bringing your oil to a temperature whereby you're not going to burn the batter before the inside apples have been cooked. So we're aiming at getting a soft apple. So it would be a medium to low heat. And I did test the heat of the oil with a little bit of the batter just to make sure it wasn't too hot. And this is how the caramel is made. So it's just using the sugar, adding a splash of water just to get it to melt, and then to bring it to a golden brown colour. And then I put a tablespoon of sesame seeds directly into the caramel. You can just sprinkle the seeds on after you've taken them out if you like, which is quite common, but I find that if you add the sesame seeds into the caramel, then it kind of tastes like sesame snaps. If you've ever had sesame snaps or kind of a sesame brittle, you get a lot more sesame in there, so I prefer that. If you want to make it look a little bit different, then you can use black sesame seeds as well as the white sesame seeds. So it looks a little bit different, but I would definitely say that just be really careful throughout the whole cooking process, because you are working with hot oil and caramel, which is going to cause a bit of damage if you get that on your skin. So that's why it's best to use a long-handled tongue or chopsticks that I used in order to fish the apples out of the caramel. So I put the caramel pieces on a cold plate to help to set them, and left them to one side. And they cooled down. You can actually serve them hot or cold. I did leave them overnight at room temperature, and I found the next day that the caramel had started melting, and there was kind of a pool of syrup at the bottom of the bowl. So I would recommend that you store them in the fridge to keep that caramel nice and hard. And they'll keep in the fridge for a couple of days. They probably wouldn't last that long because they're really Moorish, really tasty. So that is our recipe. If you've got any questions about that, it was a really quick video. I can share that with Tabia, and that can be kind of shared on social media as well as a less quick version. And the ingredients and the method will also be shared. So that is the end of my presentation. I'm just going to take the screen share off, and we can get back to questions and answers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sam. That was so interesting. Thank you. Yeah, my family loves apples, so I will be telling them all about it, and we'll give it a go, definitely. We've got a couple of questions. Robert is asking which apples would work best, and which ones should you not be using? What type?
Hi, Rob. I know Rob, so hello. Nice to see you've joined us. So I used Granny Smiths. That's a really, really good question. So I use Granny Smiths because they're quite tart and they actually help to balance with the sweetness and the fried batter. So you can use any apples, but I actually thought it worked really well with the Granny Smiths. Just to have that balance of flavour, because the caramel is very sweet. If there's kind of a new kind of fashion now to add salt to caramel to help to balance the sweetness as well. So I would definitely, if you find that the caramel can be a bit too sweet, I would add maybe 1/4 of a teaspoon of salt into the caramel, and that will actually help to balance the flavours a little bit more as well. So yeah, Granny Smith's, good English apple.
The second question, also from Robert's, asking whether it'd be nice to add some spice like cinnamon or a bit more heat like chili.
Yeah, so to keep on the Chinese theme, I would use 5 spice. So I was actually thinking of how to do it, whether it would be best to maybe sprinkle some on the apples or whether to have it in the batter. And I think maybe the spice would actually get a bit lost if you use it in the batter. So maybe if you sprinkle some on the apples. So it's kind of like having apple and cinnamon, but more of a Chinese version. Yeah, that would be a nice way to do it. Yeah.
There aren't any more questions, but we've got greetings from Broadbottom from Irit.
Hi, Irit. How are you?
Definitely some familiar faces joining us tonight. Yeah, just a big thank you for an interesting talk, and everybody, people are saying that they're looking forward to trying out the recipe.
Oh, great. I'm really glad that, I think it's something that's quite good to do with young children, as long as you're kind of controlling the caramel and the hot oil. It is quite nice because it's kind of something that's quite familiar to people, a toffee apple, because they're quite common in the UK with kind of bonfire nights and everything. But it's just kind of a slightly different way of doing it. And I think maybe, I've seen people eat the toffee off the apple and leave the apple to one side because they're more interested in the sweet. So this is a nice way to actually be able to eat both of them. Yeah.
Yeah, definitely. Are there any more questions? Put them in the chat. Otherwise, we have a question for you. We were talking before we actually came live, just to see if people would be interested in having live cooking sessions online, because the way it looks, live on campus will be put on hold for quite a while going into the new year, so we can't actually host our face-to-face cooking classes that are normally run by Sam and her colleagues. So maybe put in the chat, or I could run a poll and just see if people would be interested in some live sessions where you would cook along. Maybe Sam, you want to explain in a bit more detail how that would work?
Yeah, so I've started doing some cook-alongs recently, and it basically involves me having a couple of cameras and having you in my kitchen, or having a setup where you would basically be able to cook the food at the same time. So I would send the list of the recipe and the equipment list so that it's all prepared ahead of time, and we would cook together as if I was in the same room as you. So it seems to be working quite well. I've observed a couple of them being delivered by other organisations, and I took part in one. It was quite interesting. I took part in one that it was a dumpling making one, but it was Afghan dumplings, which was really interesting. And we made a sauce on the sides, and it took about 2 hours, and there was lots of elements to it. It was a little bit more advanced. But it was really good fun. You know, there was maybe 10 to 12 people attending, and it was quite interactive. We could all speak to each other, and we could show what we were doing to the teacher on camera, and get some feedback and response of how the dough might look and whether I needed to add more water, that kind of stuff. So yeah, I mean, I work with an organisation at the moment who usually teach a lot of face-to-face cookery. And just with the pandemic continuing and not being able to run cookery classes, it is something that we're now investing in with equipment and time, and looking, offering it to people as kind of socially distanced party idea they can do for Christmas with the family. And the interest has been quite good. You know, people are looking for different activities to do. So yeah, if you have any suggestions of any recipes that you would like us to teach, that would be quite interesting to hear, because we're always trying to second guess what would be interesting and popular for people. I think Tabia's gonna, well, it's already been shared, but my secret family recipe for Chinese curry paste is now live, and I know that people are interested in it. It's quite interesting actually, because one of my old customers sent me an email, and she was saying, oh, you know, because my family, my parents retired almost 2 years ago now from the business, and we still have people who contact us and ask us for recipes. And one person in particular was saying, we really want to be able to cook your curry. You know, how can I do this? Can you share the recipe? Please teach us. And I really wanted to say, well, if you follow the Confucius Institute online, you'll get the recipe soon. But I didn't want to say it until it was shared. So now I can share it with them and say, you know, here's the recipe. Yes. Emergency is over.
Yeah, follow us on Facebook and Twitter. It's been shared already, and I'll do that again over the Christmas break. Yeah, Robert is saying that the curry paste is amazing, so nice to hear that people have already tried it. Yeah. When we're asking for feedback and any suggestions, I've just shared our survey link as well, so if you wouldn't mind filling that out, and there's some comment boxes where you could add any suggestions or any ideas you have. So we're always grateful to hear what you would like to see and like for us to put on. I've missed one question actually, sorry. Karen is asking, could you do the same with other fruit rather than apples?
Yeah, so it's very common to do it with pineapple and bananas. So any fruit which is going to hold the shape quite well. So, you know, pears, I've never tried it with pears, but that sounds quite interesting, as it's a very similar texture to an apple. I think that would be quite interesting. I'd want us to do that. But yeah, it's very common to do it with pineapple and bananas. So if you've got some bananas that are going too ripe in the bowl, and you don't get sick of eating banana bread, which is something that everyone seems to be doing with bananas these days, deep fry it.
Yes, so Karen is trying the pineapple tonight, she's saying. So.
Oh, maybe you can take a picture and share with us, and we can see how it works out.
Yeah, that would be really the final note from me, unless you want to add anything else, Sam. I would be really interested to see any pictures. So if you do try it out, do forward them and we'll share them on our social media. That'd be fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that just leaves us to wish you all a nice festive season, a good break. Thanks for your loyalty if you're joining us or if you have joined us for our virtual events. We're really grateful. And yeah, we will keep you updated of anything else that we're planning for 2021. Enjoy the cooking and enjoy putting your feet up and eating it all. Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Merry Christmas.
Happy Christmas. Bye.
Bye.